The frost cracked like breaking glass under my boots. Wind cut through the mesquite, sharp enough to draw blood if you turned your face wrong. It was near midnight, January cold, the kind that makes a man's lungs ache just breathing. I was walking fence line when I heard it, boots crunching too light, too quick. Somebody small, moving through my north potato field, where nothing should have been growing and nobody should have been walking. Otis saw her first, swung his lantern wide, and there she was, little slip of a girl, maybe 10 years old, clutching a burlap sack against her chest like it held the last hope on earth. Her coat hung off her shoulders in tatters. Her face was all bone. He caught her by the collar and dragged her to my porch. She didn't fight, didn't cry, just held that sack tight while the wind howled around us and the smell of wood smoke drifted from my chimney. I stepped out in my suspenders, rifle lowered, saw her hollow cheeks, saw her cracked lips, saw her hands, blue-white from cold, clutching 3 frozen potatoes. "We haven't eaten in 5 days," she whispered. "Mama's sick. I'm sorry." Otis looked at me. "Want me to call the sheriff, boss?" I stared at that child, saw my own daughter's face for just a second, the one who'd left 5 years back and never wrote, the one I'd failed by working too much and loving too late. The silence stretched long, wind filled it. Then I said, "Otis, get a sack, fill it. Cornmeal, salt pork, beans, move." I drove the wagon through frozen ruts the next morning, sack of provisions rattling in the bed. The Ketchum place sat 3 miles east, a sagging cabin with a roof that looked like it had surrendered to the next good wind. Smoke trickled from the chimney, thin, struggling. I knocked, no answer, knocked again. The door creaked open. The girl stood there, same hollow face, but her eyes were different now, wary, protective. "Mama can't get up," she said. Inside smelled of sickness and damp wood. A woman lay on a narrow bed against the far wall, wrapped in quilts that had seen better decades. Her breathing rattled wet and painful. When she turned her head, I saw the same bone structure as the girl, fine features carved down to nothing by hunger and pneumonia. "Mrs. Ketchum," I said, setting the sack on the table. "Clay Whitmore brought some things." And she tried to sit up, failed. "I can't pay." "Didn't ask you to." And the girl, Nora, I'd learn later, stood between us like a guard dog, small and fierce. Maeve Ketchum coughed into a rag. When she pulled it away, there were flecks of red. She saw me notice. "How long you been sick?" I asked. "Month, maybe more." Her voice was thread thin. "Got worse after the dust storm buried the well." I looked around. One room, broken stove. Gaps in the floorboards where wind came through. The smell of old snow and mildew hung thick. "I got work at the ranch," I said. Mending, cooking, pays fair." Maeve's eyes filled. "I can't." Another cough cut her off, this one longer, deeper. Nora moved to her mother's side, small hand on her back. "Offer stands," I said. Turned to leave. "Mr. Whitmore?" I stopped at the door. Maeve's face was gray in the weak light. "If I don't make it..." She couldn't finish. Just looked at her daughter with something like desperation. "Don't let Vernon take her." The name landed cold. Vernon Hadley, bankman, foreclosure agent, the kind who smiled while signing papers that'd ruin you. "He's got papers," Maeve whispered. "Says he's her guardian if I'm gone. Matthew's brother. But he don't want her, just the land Matthew's father left. 40 acres, mineral rights." I looked at Nora. The girl was staring at the floor, jaw tight. "Rest," I said. I'll come back tomorrow." But 3 days later, Otis rode out to my fence line where I was stringing wire. "Widow Ketchum passed last night," he said. "Reverend's doing the service this afternoon." The graveyard sat on the low rise behind Oak Grove Church, exposed to wind from all directions. We stood in a blizzard of dry snow, 15 people huddled around a pine box that had cost the church fund $12. Reverend Pruitt read scripture, words whipping away in the wind before they could settle. Nora stood at the grave's edge, hands folded, face blank. She'd cried herself empty, I figured. The first shovel of dirt hit the coffin with a sound like a fist on a door. That's when I smelled it, cigar smoke, expensive, cutting through the clean winter air. Vernon Hadley stood 10 paces back, long gray coat buttoned to his throat, hat brim low. He didn't approach the grave, just stood there smoking, watching. When the last prayer finished and folks started walking back toward town, Vernon moved. He walked straight to Nora, boots crunching on frozen ground. "Miss Ketchum," he said, voice smooth as axle grease. "I'm your Uncle Vernon, your legal guardian now." He pulled folded papers from his coat. "Got it all drawn up proper. You'll stay with me till you're of age." Nora looked up at him, said nothing. Vernon smiled, not kind, efficient. "Also brought this," and he handed her a second paper. "Eviction notice, 30 days to clear your mama's cabin. Property reverts to mortgage holder," that's me, February 15th. "She's 10 years old," I said, stepping forward. Vernon turned, smile widening. "Mr. Whitmore." Generous of you to come. He glanced at the provision sack I'd left by the grave. And to provide charity. But the law's clear. Girl needs family, not handouts. You're not family, I said. You're a banker with a land grab. His smile never wavered. I'm a court-appointed guardian with legal standing. You're an unmarried cattleman with no claim whatsoever. He tipped his hat. Good day, sir. He turned back to Nora. I'll collect you tomorrow morning, child. Have your things ready. Then he walked away, cigar smoke trailing behind him like a signal fire. Nora stood there holding 2 pieces of paper, one making her an orphan-in-law, one making her homeless, in fact. The wind pulled at her coat. The smell of fresh-turned earth mixed with tobacco. She looked up at me, didn't ask for help, didn't cry. Just looked, and I thought about my daughter, the one I'd failed, and about all the ways a man learns he's been weighed and found wanting. Come on, I said. You get your things. You're staying at my place tonight. Reverend Pruitt stepped forward, low voice urgent. Clay, you gotta be careful. Vernon's got pull with Judge Morrison. Then we'll be careful, I said. But she ain't spending her first night orphaned in that man's house. Nora folded the papers slowly, tucked them in her coat, followed me to the wagon without a word. Behind us, Vernon Hadley stood by the church steps, still smoking, watching us leave with the patience of a man who knew the law was on his side. The bunkhouse sat 50 yards from the main house, solid timber with a wood stove that kept the cold mostly at bay. I'd had Otis clean it out that morning, swept the floor, stacked firewood, laid out blankets. Nora stood in the doorway, still holding her small bundle of belongings. Everything she owned fit in a flour sack. You can sleep here, I said. Stove works, privy's out back. Main house is there if you need anything. She nodded once, stepped inside. I turned to leave, then stopped. Pulled off my coat, heavy sheepskin, worn but warm, and held it out. No, she said quietly. Wasn't asking. She stared at it. I can't pay you back. I don't recall sending a bill. Finally she took it. Her fingers disappeared in the sleeves. The coat hung past her knees like a tent. Otis appeared in the doorway behind me, holding something folded. His face looked strange, soft in a way I'd never seen. This was my daughter's, he said, voice rough. He held out a blue wool coat, girl-sized, carefully preserved. She'd be about your age now if she'd lived. Scarlet fever took her in 29. He laid it on the bunk, touched it once, gentle, then walked out without another word. The smell of cedar and old lavender drifted from the fabric. Nora stood there, looking at the coat like it might vanish if she blinked. Next morning, Lila Havens came by the ranch. She ran the general store in town, a widow herself, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. She found me by the cattle pen, checking a lame calf. Clay Whitmore, she said, hands on hips. We need to talk. I straightened. Morning, Lila. Don't morning me. She glanced toward the bunkhouse. That the Ketchum girl? Nora, yes. You know what folks are saying? The wind carried the smell of hay and manure between us. Somewhere a cow lowed, long and lonely. Don't much care what folks say, I replied. Well, you better start caring. Lila's voice dropped. You're an unmarried man with a young girl living on your property. Vernon's telling everyone you're unfit, says he'll prove it in court. He's got no standing. He's got papers in a judge's ear, Clay. And you've got, what, good intentions? She shook her head. I'm not saying it's right. I'm saying it's trouble. I looked toward the bunkhouse. Smoke rose from the chimney. Through the window, I could see Nora's silhouette moving around inside. What would you have me do? I asked. Turn her over to a man who wants her land, not her? No. Lila's voice softened. But you need to understand, this ain't just about doing right. It's about looking right. And right now, you look like a rich man taking advantage. That's horseshit. Well, maybe, but it's horseshit that'll stick if you're not careful. She touched my arm. Get a lawyer, Clay. A good one. Before Vernon gets his teeth in deeper, she walked back to her wagon, leaving me standing there with the wind and the weight of knowing she was right. The lawyer's office smelled of ink and old paper. Edgar Sims sat behind a desk stacked with ledgers, wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. He'd been Matthew Ketchum's attorney, knew the family, knew the land. Texas statute's clear, he said, tapping a law book. Unmarried male seeking to adopt requires community moral endorsement. Judge Morrison will want testimonies, character witnesses, that sort of thing. Fine, I said. I'll get witnesses. Sims looked at me over his glasses. Will you? What's that mean? Means your own daughter won't speak to you, Clay. Hasn't in 5 years. You think the judge won't ask about that? The words landed like a fist. I said nothing. Sims continued, gentler now. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying Vernon Hadley's been preparing this case since before Maeve Ketchum died. He bought her mortgage 2 months ago, paid pennies on the dollar to some outfit in Amarillo, been waiting for her to pass so he could move on the land. The mineral rights, I said. Exactly. Word is, there's oil under that 40 acres, maybe a lot of it. Sims closed the book. Vernon's not interested in raising a child. He's interested in a payday. But the law gives him guardianship by blood relation, and then it makes you look like a rich man stealing an orphan. Yes. I stood, paced to the window. Outside, the main street of town stretched dusty and half-empty. Depression had hit hard. Half the storefronts were boarded up. How long do I have? I asked. Hearings March 10th, 6 weeks. Sims paused. Clay, I'll represent you. But you need to know, without that moral endorsement, without witnesses who'll vouch for your character against a blood relative with legal papers, Vernon wins by default. The smell of ink hung heavy. Through the window I could hear a wagon rattling past, its wheels creaking in the frozen ruts. Then I'll get witnesses, I said. Sims looked at me with something like pity. Half this county owes Vernon money, Clay. They won't cross him. Not for you, not for anybody. I walked out into the cold, his words following me like shadows. When I got back to the ranch, Nora was sitting on the bunkhouse steps, wearing Otis's daughter's coat. She'd been crying. I could see the tracks on her cheeks, but she'd stopped now. Hadley came by, she said quietly. Left another paper. She held it out. Official county seal at the top. Custody hearing. March 10th, 1934. Ward of the State, Nora Ketchum. Petitioner, Vernon Hadley, legal guardian. At the bottom, in Vernon's handwriting, the law's on my side, Whitmore. Give up now and save yourself the embarrassment. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of distant smoke. Nora looked up at me. You don't have to fight him. I know it's trouble. I folded the paper, put it in my pocket. Trouble's relative, I said. Come on, let's get you some supper. But that night, lying awake in the main house, I thought about my daughter's last words to me before she left for California. You were always too busy for the people who needed you, Daddy. Maybe now you'll have time to notice. And I wondered if she was right. The dust storm hit on a Tuesday morning, rolling in from the northwest like a brown wall that blotted out the sun. We'd had 3 days of wind building, the air tasting of grit and electricity. I was in the barn with Otis when the sky went dark at noon. Get the stock inside, I shouted over the rising howl. I'm going for the girl. The cabin, Maeve's old place, sat exposed on flat ground with nothing to break the wind. By the time I got the truck halfway there, I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Had to navigate by memory, feeling for ruts in the road. When I reached the property, the cabin was already half buried. Drifts of dust piled against the north wall like snow. The door hung open, banging in the wind. Nora! I called, but the storm swallowed my voice. I found her in what was left of the bedroom, digging through a chest with both hands. Dust swirled through gaps in the walls. Her face was covered. She'd tied a kerchief over her nose and mouth. We have to go, I said, grabbing her arm. Wait, she pulled something from the chest. A Bible, leather-bound and cracked. Mama's, the roof groaned. Somewhere timber snapped. Now, I said. We made it to the truck as the first wall gave way. Drove back blind, Nora clutching that Bible like it was the only solid thing left in the world. That evening, after the wind died and the air settled into an eerie orange twilight, Otis and I dug out what we could from the ruins. Wasn't much worth saving. The cabin had stood since the 1880s. Now it was just kindling and dust. Nora sat in the truck bed, watching us work. She hadn't spoken since we'd left. When we finished, I walked over. You'll stay in the bunkhouse permanent now. No sense going back and forth to nothing. She nodded. Opened the Bible carefully. Dust fell from the pages. That's when the photograph slipped out. Old, sepia-toned, edges worn soft. 2 men standing beside a chuck wagon, both young, both grinning. One wore a wide-brimmed hat I recognized, my father's style. The other had Nora's eyes. She picked it up, turned it over. On the back, in faded ink, James Whitmore and Samuel Ketchum, Chisholm Trail, 1901. Who's this with your daddy? She asked, handing it to me. I stared at the photograph. My father had died when I was 12, never talked much about his trail driving days. But I knew that face, had seen it in a dozen photographs at the main house. And Samuel Ketchum, Nora's grandfather. The pieces fell together slow, like ice breaking in spring. Come on, I said. We need to see the Reverend. Reverend Pruitt lived behind the church in a small parsonage that smelled of coffee and old books. He listened while I explained, studying the photograph under lamplight. I remember, he said finally. Your father talked about it once. Trail drive in 1901, stampede outside Abilene. Samuel Ketchum rode into the herd, turned it back, saved your father's life. Could have been trampled himself. And he set the photograph down gently. James Whitmore never forgot it. Tried to repay Samuel, but the man wouldn't take a dime. Said helping was what you did for trail partners. The room was quiet except for the ticking of a mantel clock. Through the window, I could see the church steeple silhouetted against the darkening sky. That's a debt of honor, Reverend said. Blood debt, some might call it. I looked at Nora. She sat very still, hands folded in her lap, listening. The hearing's in 5 weeks, I said. Will you testify? Reverend Pruitt was quiet a long moment. Outside, a dog barked, lonely and distant. I'll testify, he said. But you need to understand something, Clay. Vernon's been collecting debts all over this county. Foreclosures, equipment loans, seed money. Half the people who might speak for you owe him money. They won't cross him without a bigger reason than one man's good intentions. What kind of reason? The kind where they got nothing left to lose. He leaned back in his chair, or the kind where they believe they're doing something bigger than saving themselves. He stood, walked to his desk, and pulled out an envelope. Sealed, yellowed at the edges. Maeve Ketchum gave me this 2 weeks before she died, he said. Made me promise to read it when the time was right. He looked at me steady. I reckon the time's getting close. What's in it? Her wishes. For Nora. He set the envelope back in the drawer. But it ain't for you yet. It's for the hearing. When folks need to hear a dead woman speak truth. The clock ticked. The lamplight flickered. You're a hard man, Clay, Reverend said. Always have been. Built an empire on hard work and harder decisions. But you're not a cruel man, and you're not a man who runs from his debts. He glanced at Nora. Maybe you see a chance to pay one that's 40 years overdue. I thought about my father, about the stories he never told, about the daughter I had failed to keep and the girl sitting in my parsonage who had nobody left. Maybe, I said. Then you fight, Reverend said, and I'll fight with you. But you need to be ready. Vernon won't just take the girl. He'll take your reputation, your standing, maybe your ranch if he can. He's that kind of mean. Let him try. Reverend smiled faint. That's the spirit that built this place. Just make sure it don't bury you too. We drove back to the ranch in darkness. The stars were out, hard and bright in the dust-cleared sky. The smell of disturbed earth hung heavy. Nora broke the silence. Did you know about your daddy and my grandpa? No, I said, but I do now. Does it matter? I thought about that. Shouldn't have to, but maybe it does. She was quiet for a mile. Then, what if the judge says I have to go with Uncle Vernon? Then we'll appeal. And if that don't work? I pulled the truck into the ranch yard. Lights burned in the main house. Otis had left the porch lamp on. Then we'll figure something else, I said. But you ain't going with him, not while I'm breathing. She looked at me in the dashboard light. Why? Because it's the right thing. That ain't a good enough reason for most folks. No, I said, but it's good enough for me. She climbed out of the truck, Bible tucked under her arm. Halfway to the bunkhouse, she stopped, turned back. Mr. Whitmore, thank you. Then she disappeared into the dark, and I sat there in the truck cab thinking about debts and daughters and all the ways a man tries to make right what he broke. The wind picked up again, but softer now, almost gentle. Winter wasn't finished with us yet. By late February, the cold had settled into something mean and personal. Ice formed in the water troughs every night. The cattle stood in tight clusters, breathing steam, waiting for spring that wouldn't come. I found Vernon Hadley at his bank on a Tuesday morning. The building sat on Main Street, all polished oak and marble floors that smelled of lemon oil and cigar smoke. Vernon's office was in the back, windows facing the railroad tracks. He looked up when I walked in, smiled like we were old friends. Clay Whitmore, to what do I owe the pleasure? I didn't sit. Nora stays with me. That's for the judge to decide. I'm making it clear now. She's under my protection. Vernon leaned back in his leather chair, laced his fingers over his vest. Protection, interesting word. From what, exactly? Her legal guardian? From a man who wants her land, not her welfare. Careful, Clay. That sounds like slander. He pulled a cigar from his desk drawer, rolled it between his fingers. I'm acting within the law. Court-appointed guardian. Paper signed by Judge Morrison himself. What are you acting within? Decency. He laughed, short and sharp. Decency doesn't hold up in court. He lit the cigar, puffed until the end glowed. But I'll tell you what, I'm a reasonable man, business-minded. I'm listening. The Ketchum land, 40 acres, mineral rights included. I'll sell it to you, $12,000, cash. He blew smoke toward the ceiling. I'll even forgive that equipment loan you took out last fall. The tractor note, what was that? $8,500. The room went quiet. Outside, a train whistle sounded, distant and mournful. That's generous, I said carefully. It is. Because I like you, Clay. Always have. He smiled. So what do you say? You get the land, I get my money, the girl gets a stable home with a man of means, everybody wins. I looked at him, at the cigar, at the smile that didn't reach his eyes. No, I said. The smile faded. No. The land stays in Nora's name. When she's of age, she decides what happens to it. Vernon set the cigar in an ashtray, leaned forward. Then we do this the hard way. Seems so. He opened a ledger, ran his finger down a column. Your equipment loan, due April 1st. $8,500. Cash payment, no extensions, I'm calling it in. The words landed cold. My chest tightened. That note's not due till I say it is. Read the fine print, Clay. Acceleration clause. I can demand full payment if I deem the loan at risk. He looked up. And I deem it at risk. On what grounds? On the grounds that you're about to lose a very public court case. Bad for your reputation, bad for your credit. He smiled again. Bad for business. I stood there, the floor solid under my boots, but everything else shifting. April 1st, Vernon repeated. Cash. Or I repossess your tractor, your combine, and anything else that secures the note. He picked up his cigar. Still want to play hero? I turned, walked out without answering. Behind me, his voice followed. See you in court, Clay. Sunday service let out at noon. Folks streamed from the church into weak sunlight, bundled in coats, talking low among themselves. I waited by my truck, hat in hand. Vernon stood on the church steps, holding court with a group of farmers. When he saw me watching, he raised his voice. Terrible thing about the Whitmore situation, he said, loud enough to carry. Man takes in a child out of what? Charity? Pity? Then can't even pay his debts. Heads turned. My loan's current, I called out. Vernon smiled. For now. But April's coming fast, ain't it? He looked at the gathered crowd. Folks, I've seen this before. Man overextends himself, gets in financial trouble, starts making poor decisions. He paused. Taking in an orphan girl when you can't even cover your own notes? That's poor judgment. Lila Havens stepped forward, voice sharp. That's enough, Vernon. Just stating facts, Mrs. Havens. Public record. He descended the steps, walking toward his automobile. Asset rich, cash poor. That's what they call it. Man sitting on 10,000 acres but can't scrape together 8,500 in currency. He opened his car door, looked back at the crowd. Makes you wonder what other poor decisions he might be making. Someone in the crowd muttered. Another nodded. I felt it then, the shift, the way people's eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. The way conversations stopped when I got close. Vernon drove away, cigar smoke trailing from his window. Otis appeared at my elbow. Boss. I know. Half these people owe him money. They ain't gonna... I know. Across the churchyard, I saw Nora standing alone by the cemetery gate, wearing Otis's daughter's coat. She'd heard everything. Her face was stone. Lila walked over, voice low. He's poisoning the well, Clay. I noticed. It's not just about the money. He's making you look reckless, unstable. She glanced toward the dispersing crowd. People are saying things. What things? She hesitated. That you're using the girl to distract from your financial troubles. That it's not appropriate. Unmarried man, young girl living on your property. Her voice dropped further. That maybe Vernon's right. Maybe she'd be better off with family. The words hit like fists. Vernon Hadley's not family, I said. He's a vulture with a badge. I know that. You know that. But the law don't see it that way. She touched my arm. You need $8,500 in 5 weeks, or you lose your equipment. You need community support for the hearing, but Vernon's turning everyone against you. How are you going to fight both battles? I looked at Nora. She was watching me, waiting to see if I'd fold. Don't know yet, I said, but I'll figure it out. Lila shook her head. You're a stubborn man, Clay Whitmore. Been called worse. She walked back to her wagon. The churchyard emptied. Soon, it was just me, Otis, and Nora, standing in the cold wind that smelled of distant rain and turned earth. Nora walked over slowly. I heard what he said about the money. Don't worry about it. It's $8,500 because of me, because you're fighting for me. And it's $8,500 because Vernon's a coward who uses money as a weapon. She looked up at me. What if you can't pay it? The question hung between us. Honest. Impossible to dodge. Then I lose some equipment, I said. Ranch keeps running. But it hurts you, makes you look bad. Maybe. So why do it? I thought about my daughter. About all the times I'd chosen work over her. About the way she'd looked at me the day she left, like I was a stranger who happened to share her name. Because some things are worth more than looking good, I said. Nora studied my face for a long moment, then nodded once like she'd decided something. We drove home in silence, the truck rattling over frozen roads. That night, I lay awake doing math in my head. $8,500 in cash. I had maybe $1,200 in the bank, could sell the breeding bull, might bring $3,000, mortgage some land. But Vernon controlled half the lending in the county. The numbers wouldn't add up no matter how I turned them. Through the window, I could see the bunkhouse. A lamp burned inside. Nora, probably reading her mama's Bible by lamplight. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the smell of coming weather. Spring felt a long way off. The forge shed sat behind the barn, a low-roof structure built from stone and timber that smelled of coal smoke and old iron. I hadn't used it much in recent years. Easier to take work into town, but the tools were still there. The anvil still solid. I found Nora standing outside it one afternoon in early March, staring at something wrapped in burlap. "What's that?" I asked. She unwrapped it carefully. A plow blade, old and broken, clean through the middle. The metal was rust-spotted, the brake jagged. "It was Mama's," she said quietly, "from Grandpa Ketchum's original homestead plow. She kept it even after the rest wore out." Her voice went smaller. "I found it in the cabin ruins. Thought maybe—" She didn't finish. I took the blade, felt its weight, good steel underneath the rust. Broken, but not beyond saving. "Come on," I said. Inside the forge, I built up the coal fire, pumped the bellows until the flames glowed orange-white. The heat pushed back the March cold. The smell of burning coal filled the small space. "You ever worked iron?" I asked. She shook her head. "Then watch first." I positioned the broken blade in the coals, let it heat until it glowed. Iron's like people, breaks under the wrong kind of pressure. But apply heat, apply the right force at the right time. I pulled it out, set it on the anvil, began hammering the rough edges smooth. It can be shaped into something stronger than it was. The hammer rang against metal, steady and rhythmic. Nora watched, silent. After a while I stopped. "Your turn. Pump the bellows." She stepped up to the leather bellows, pushed down. Air whooshed into the coals. The fire brightened. "Steady," I said. "Even rhythm. Fire needs to breathe, same as you." She found the rhythm. Push, release. Push, release, the forge roared. We worked for an hour, heating and hammering, until the two halves of the blade were ready to be joined. Sweat ran down my back despite the cold outside. Nora's face was flushed from the heat. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "The forge work, I mean." I set the hammer down. "Because it needs doing." "That's not what I mean." She stopped pumping, looked at me direct. "Why are you taking me in? You could lose your equipment, your reputation. People are talking. Miss Hadley's making you look bad." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm not worth all that." The fire crackled between us. "You asking me to give up?" I said. "I'm asking why you won't." When I thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, tangled up in my own failures, my own daughter's face, 40-year-old debts, and present-day reckonings. "My daughter left 5 years ago," I said finally. Day after her mama's funeral, said I worked too much, loved too late, that I was always too busy for the people who needed me. I picked up the blade halves. She was right. Nora said nothing. "Can't fix that," I continued. "Can't go back and be a better father to a girl who won't even write me letters, but maybe—" I set the pieces down carefully. "Maybe I can get it right this time. Not because it fixes the past, because it's the right thing now. Even if it costs you everything? Even then." She looked at the broken plow blade, at the forge fire, at me. "Mama used to say, you can tell a man's worth by what he's willing to lose for something that can't pay him." Back, her eyes were bright. I think she was right. We went back to work without more words. That evening, after Nora had gone to the bunkhouse, I sat at my desk in the main house and pulled out a wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my daughter, all unsent. I read through them slowly. Apologies, explanations, promises to do better. All the things I should have said when she was still here to hear them. Otis knocked, came in without waiting. "Boss, you all right?" I set down the letter I was holding. "How long you known me, Otis?" 23 years. "Ever tell you about Sarah, my daughter?" "Some." He sat down across from me, his old bones creaking. "Enough to know you got regrets." "No, she wrote me once," what I said. 6 months after she left. Said she'd met a man in California. He was getting married. Didn't invite me to the wedding. I touched the stack of letters. I wrote back. Tried to explain, never sent it. Why not? Because I figured she was right to cut me off. I'd failed her. No amount of explaining would change that. Otis was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's this got to do with the Ketchum girl?" "Everything. Nothing." I looked at the letters. "I can't fix what I broke with Sarah. But Nora, she's right here. Right now. And if I don't fight for her, I'm just proving my daughter right. That I'm a man who chooses wrong when it matters. Even if fighting costs you the ranch." Ranches just land and cattle. What's it worth if I'm still the same man who let his daughter walk away? Otis nodded slowly. So what are you going to do? I gathered the letters, all of them, and stood. Something I should have done years ago. I walked to the forge shed. The coals were still hot from earlier. I fed them, built the fire back up, then began feeding in the letters, one by one. The paper caught, curled, turned to ash. Otis watched from the doorway. You sure about this? Yeah. I dropped in the last letter, the one I'd written after Sarah's wedding, the one that said all the things I thought would make a difference. It burned like all the rest. Can't fix the past by holding on to it. Can only try to do better with what's in front of me now. The smoke rose through the forge chimney, carrying away years of unsaid words. When the last letter was ash, I damped the fire and walked back to the house. Otis followed. You still need $8,500 by April 1st. I know. And you got, what, maybe $4,000 if you sell the breeding bull? Maybe. And so you're short $4,500 with 3 weeks to go. That's about right. Otis scratched his jaw. You got a plan? I looked out the window toward the bunkhouse. The lamp was still on, Nora reading probably. Working on it, I said. But the truth was, I had no idea how I'd make the money. No idea how I'd win the hearing with half the town turned against me. All I knew was that I wasn't giving up. The wind rattled the window panes. Outside, the temperature was dropping again. But somewhere in the smell of cold air and distant storms, I caught something else. Rain, maybe. Spring, trying to break through winter's grip. Not here yet, but coming. The man showed up at Lila's store on a Thursday morning, just after she'd opened. Big fellow, thick shoulders, wearing a coat that didn't quite hide the bulge under his left arm. Lila was stocking shelves when he walked in. The bell above the door chimed. He didn't browse, didn't pretend, just walked straight to the counter. Mrs. Havens, he said, voice flat, professional. Can I help you? Mr. Hadley sent me. Wanted to remind you about your store mortgage. Payments due, end of March. Lila set down the can she was holding. I'm aware. Good. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Also wanted to mention, Mr. Hadley's been hearing things about you organizing some kind of fund for the Whitmore situation. The store was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Outside, a wagon rolled past, wheels crunching on gravel. I don't know what you're talking about, Lila said. Sure you do. Folks putting money together, donations, for the girl. He leaned on the counter. Mr. Hadley thinks that's real charitable. But he also thinks you might want to reconsider, being as how your mortgage comes up for renewal in May. Is that a threat? It's a friendly observation. He straightened. You testify for Whitmore at that hearing. You speak against Mr. Hadley's guardianship claim. And well, banks have to make hard decisions sometimes. About who's a good risk and who ain't. He touched his hat brim, turned to leave. Tell Mr. Hadley, Lila said, voice steel cold, that if he wants to threaten me, he can do it himself. I'm done being scared of men who hide behind hired muscle. The man stopped at the door, looked back. Something like respect flickered across his face. I'll pass that along, he said. Then he was gone. Lila stood there, heart pounding, hands shaking. The smell of coffee and flour and fear hung in the air. The bell chimed again. Reverend Pruitt stepped in, took one look at her face. What happened? She told him. When she finished, the Reverend's jaw was tight. Vernon's getting desperate. Or confident. Lila moved to lock the front door, flipped the sign to closed. We need to talk, now. They met in the church basement that evening. Lila, Reverend Pruitt, Otis, and a handful of others. People who owed Vernon nothing, or people who decided they had nothing left to lose. The room smelled of damp stone and old hymnals. A single oil lamp cast shadows on the walls. We got 3 weeks till the hearing, Reverend said. Clay needs 2 things, money for that loan, and witnesses who'll testify he's fit to raise the girl. He's not getting the money, Otis said bluntly. Not in 3 weeks, even if he sells everything that ain't nailed down. Then we raise it, Lila said. We've got maybe $1,200 in the fund, someone pointed out. That's not even close. So we get more. Lila looked around the room. Every person here can contribute something. Labor, goods, cash, we pool it all. Vernon will retaliate, another voice said. You saw what happened to Lila. Then he retaliates. Reverend's voice was quiet but firm. But we do this anyway, because it's right. Silence fell. The lamp flickered. Then one by one, people nodded. I can donate my month's store profits, Lila said. $300? I got 50 in savings, Otis added. And 2 weeks' wages coming. An old farmer spoke up. I'll trade labor for cash, fix fences, mend roofs, whatever folks need. Others chimed in. $20 here, 10 there, a wedding ring worth 50. A team of horses someone would sell. Reverend wrote it all down in a ledger, tallying as he went. When they finished, he looked up. $3,200, maybe 35 if everything sells. Still short, 1,500, Otis said. Lila bit her lip, thinking. Then, what about Vernon's other foreclosures? The ones Reverend mentioned before? What about them? If we can prove he's been buying up homesteads cheap and flipping them for profit, especially if he's been doing it fraudulently, that damages his character. Makes him look less like a concerned guardian and more like what he is. Reverend leaned forward. Judge Morrison won't look kindly on a man using the courts to line his pockets. But we'd need proof, Otis said. Land office has records, Lila replied. Public records. Deeds, sale prices, transfers. She looked at Reverend. How many foreclosures did you say he handled? 6 in the last 2 years, maybe 7. Well, and what did he do with the properties? Sold them, fast, to oil speculators mostly. Lila's eyes lit up. Then we get those records, show the pattern, bring it to the hearing. One of the farmers shifted uncomfortably. That's asking for trouble. Vernon finds out we're digging into his business. He's already threatening us. Lila cut in. Might as well give him a reason. Reverend Pruitt pulled something from his coat pocket, the sealed envelope. Yellowed, worn at the edges. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Maeve Ketchum's letter, the one she gave me before she died. The room went still. I promised I'd read it when the time was right. He looked around at the gathered faces. I think the time's coming. What's it say? Otis asked. Don't know. Haven't opened it. But Maeve was specific. Said it was for when folks needed to hear her speak on Nora's future. He set the envelope on the table. Whatever's in here, she thought it mattered. Enough to put it in writing when she knew she was dying. Lila reached out, touched the envelope gently. This could change everything. Or nothing, Reverend said, but it's what she wanted. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of a dead woman's words heavy between them. Finally, Lila stood. All right, here's what we do. I'll go to the land office tomorrow, pull Vernon's transaction records. Otis, you keep collecting donations, quiet-like. Reverend, you hold on to that letter till the hearing. And she looked around. And we all show up, March 10th, stand together. Let the judge see Vernon Hadley ain't the only one with a claim on this community's conscience. Heads nodded. One more thing, Reverend said. Clay doesn't know we're doing this. The money, the investigation, any of it. Why not? Otis asked. Because he's a proud man. He'll say no. Say he doesn't want charity, doesn't want folks risking themselves. Reverend's voice softened. But sometimes, the best thing you can do for a proud man is not give him the chance to refuse help, and they murmured agreement. As the meeting broke up and people filed out into the cold night, Lila lingered. She picked up the ledger, studied the names and numbers. $3,200 from people who barely had enough for themselves. Labor from men who worked dawn to dusk already. A dead woman's letter that might hold the key to everything. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Not much. Not enough to break the drought, but enough to make the air smell clean and hopeful. She locked the church basement door and walked home through the drizzle, thinking about communities and courage and the peculiar math of people who decided that doing right was worth more than playing safe. Behind her, in the church steeple, the bell sat silent in the darkness. But come March 10th, Reverend Pruitt had decided, that bell would ring, 47 times, one for every person he planned to convince to stand. The rain came harder the next week, turning the roads to mud and the air to something you could almost drink. It was late March now, and winter was finally breaking. I found Nora in the barn one afternoon, sitting on a hay bale with a book open on her lap. She wasn't reading, just staring at the pages. Something wrong? I asked. She looked up. Her face was drawn, older somehow. Mr. Whitmore, can I ask you something? Sure. Your daughter, the one who left, she hesitated. Why'd she really go? I leaned against a stall door. Outside, rain pattered on the roof. The barn smelled of hay and horses and damp wood. Told you already. I work too much. That's not all of it. Her voice was quiet but firm. Is it? I was silent a long moment, then, no, that's not all of it. She waited. Her mama died of influenza, I said finally. Winter of 29. Sarah was 17. She needed me to be there, to talk, to grieve with her. I looked at my hands. I buried myself in ranch work instead. Told myself I was providing, keeping things running. But the truth is, I didn't know how to sit with that kind of pain, hers or mine. So you worked? So I worked. The words tasted like ash. And every day I didn't talk about it. Didn't let her see me hurt, she pulled further away. By the time I noticed, it was too late. She packed a bag and left for California. Said I'd already been gone for months. She was just making it official. Rain drummed harder. A horse nickered softly in its stall. Did you try to stop her? Nora asked. No. Figured she had a right to go. That I'd failed her too bad to ask her to stay. But you wrote her letters. I glanced at her, surprised. How'd you know that? Otis mentioned it. Said you burned a whole box of them the other night. I nodded. 15 letters over 5 years. Never sent a single one. Why not? Because I struggled for the words. Because I kept thinking I needed to have the right thing to say first, the perfect explanation, the words that'd make her forgive me. I looked at Nora. Took me 5 years to realize there ain't no perfect words. And by then, I'd lost the chance to say any words at all. Nora closed her book. You think the judge is going to ask about her at the hearing? Probably. What'll you say? I thought about that, about all the ways I'd failed, about Vernon's accusations of being unfit, about the truth that'd sound damning no matter how I phrased it. The truth, I said, that I failed my own daughter, that she won't speak to me, and I can't blame her for it. I met Nora's eyes, and that maybe that makes me unfit. Maybe the judge will say so. Maybe he'll be right. Her face fell. Then why are you fighting? Because being unfit yesterday don't mean I have to be unfit tomorrow. I moved closer, sat on the hay bale beside her. I can't change what I did with Sarah. Can't make those years right. But I can try to do better now, with you. Even if I fail again, and I might, at least I'll have tried. That's not good enough for a judge. Maybe not, but it's all I got. She was quiet for a long moment. Rain dripped through a gap in the roof, plinking into a bucket. Mama used to say people ain't just their worst day, Nora said softly. That everybody's got a chance to be different than they were. Your mama sounds like she was smart. She was. Nora's voice cracked. But she's gone. And if the judge says I gotta go with Uncle Vernon, all her being smart won't matter. And I wanted to promise her everything would be fine, that the judge would see reason, that the hearing would go our way, but I'd made too many promises I couldn't keep. If the judge rules against me, I said instead, we'll appeal. And if that don't work, we'll figure something else. But I ain't giving up on you, Nora. Not even if the law says I should. She looked at me with those old eyes and a young face, even if it costs you everything. Even then, she leaned against my shoulder, just for a second, then pulled away and stood. The plow blade, she said. Can we finish it today? Yeah, let's finish it. We worked in the forge shed all afternoon, the rain drumming on the roof while the fire roared, and the hammer rang. I'd already prepared the blade halves. Now came the hardest part. Welding them together. Watch the color, I told Nora as I heated the metal. When it's yellow-white, almost sparking, that's when the iron wants to join. She pumped the bellows, steady and sure now. She'd learned the rhythm. When the metal reached the right heat, I pulled it out, positioned the two halves on the anvil, and brought the hammer down. Once, twice, again and again, sparks flying with each strike. The two pieces began to merge, slowly, imperfectly, but together. Why's it work? Nora asked over the ringing. Why do two broken pieces stick? Heat and pressure, I said, and the willingness of iron to become something new. I reheated the blade, hammered again. The seam was rough, but holding. People ain't much different, I added. Broken pieces can come together. Just takes the right conditions. We worked in silence after that, letting the hammer do the talking. Finally, hours later, I held up the finished blade. The weld line was visible, a scar running through the middle, but the blade was whole, stronger at the break than it had been before. That's how it works, I said, showing Nora. The scar don't make it weaker, makes it tougher, because it had to work harder to be whole again. She touched the blade gently, tracing the weld line with one finger. Can I learn to do it? She asked. The forge work? You already have. I set the blade aside to cool. But there's one more thing you should know. What's that? I pulled a small iron stamp from the tool rack, my brand mark, a simple W inside a circle. Every rancher's got a mark, I said. Way to say, this belongs to me, or I'm responsible for this. I handed her the stamp. If you want, I'll teach you how to use it. So, when you're older, you can mark your own work, make your own claim. She held the stamp like it was something precious. What if the judge says I ain't yours to teach? Then we'll prove him wrong. I damped the forge fire. But either way, you'll know how. That's something nobody can take from you. Outside, the rain eased. Through the gaps in the shed walls, I could see the sky lightening to the west. The creek that had been dry since November was running again. I could hear it from here, water over stones, the sound of something returning to life. Spring was coming, just in time for everything to be decided. 4 days till the hearing. March 10th came with sun breaking through thin clouds and a warm breeze that smelled of wet earth and new grass. The kind of day that makes you believe in second chances. The hearing wasn't in a courtroom. Judge Morrison had decided to hold it at Oak Grove Church grounds, under the old oak tree where the community held testimony circles in the old days. Frontier tradition. Let folks speak their piece where God could hear, as well as the law. I drove Nora there, in the truck. She wore Otis's daughter's blue coat, freshly cleaned. Her hair was braided neat. She didn't say much, just watched the countryside roll past. When we arrived, I stopped breathing. There were people everywhere. 40, maybe 50, gathered in a loose circle around the oak tree. Farmers I knew, shopkeepers, ranchers from 3 counties over, old women in Sunday clothes, young men in clean shirts. Lila Havens stood near the front, arms crossed, face determined. Otis was beside her. Reverend Pruitt stood beneath the oak, Bible in one hand. And in the center of it all sat Judge Morrison at a small table, looking both surprised and impressed by the turnout. Vernon Hadley stood off to one side, alone, cigar between his fingers. When he saw the crowd, something flickered across his face. Not quite fear, but close. "What's all this?" I muttered to Otis as we approached. "Community," he said simply. "Showed up to speak." Judge Morrison banged a gavel on his table. The crowd quieted. "This is a guardianship hearing," he announced. "Matter of Nora Ketchum, minor child. Petitioner Vernon Hadley seeks to maintain court-appointed guardianship. Clayton Whitmore contests said guardianship and petitions for adoption rights." He looked at the gathered crowd. "I see we have an audience." "They're here to testify, Your Honor," Reverend Pruitt said, "as is their right under testimony circle tradition." Judge Morrison considered that, then nodded. "Very well. Mr. Hadley, you may present your case." Vernon stepped forward, confident. "Your Honor, the law is clear. I am Nora Ketchum's blood uncle, court-appointed guardian. Miss Whitmore is an unmarried man with no legal standing, and a history of—" he paused for effect— "failed fatherhood. His own daughter refuses contact with him. He is financially overextended, with debts coming due that he cannot pay, and he has been cohabitating with a minor female child in a manner that, while perhaps well-intentioned, is inappropriate and potentially damaging to her moral development." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Furthermore," Vernon continued, "Whitmore's ranch, while substantial in acreage, is asset-rich and cash-poor. He cannot even pay an $8,000 equipment loan without liquidating holdings. This is not a man capable of providing stable guardianship." He sat down, looking satisfied. Judge Morrison turned to me. "Mr. Whitmore, your response?" I stood. My mouth was dry. Every eye was on me. "Your Honor, Mr. Hadley's right about some things. My daughter don't speak to me. I failed her, worked too much, loved too late. She left 5 years ago, and I can't blame her." The words hurt coming out, but they were true. "And yeah, I got debts. Ranch runs on credit like most operations. Times are hard." I paused. "But here's what he ain't telling you. Nora's mama, Maeve Ketchum, told me before she died, don't let Vernon take her. And she knew he didn't want Nora. He wanted the land, the mineral rights. There's oil under that 40 acres, and Vernon's been buying up homesteads cheap, flipping them to speculators for 10 times what he paid." Vernon's face went dark. "That's slander." "It's public record," Lila Havens called out. She stepped forward, holding papers. "Land office documents, Your Honor. 6 foreclosures in 2 years. Vernon bought them for an average of $800 each. Sold them within 3 months for an average of $7,000. She handed the papers to the judge. "He's not a guardian. He's a land speculator, using a little girl to get his hands on her inheritance." The crowd murmured louder now. Judge Morrison studied the documents, his expression hardening. "As for the cohabitation concerns," Reverend Pruitt said, stepping forward, "I visit Mr. Whitmore's ranch weekly. The child stays in a separate bunkhouse. She is clothed, fed, and treated with dignity. I have seen nothing inappropriate. Only a man trying to do right by a child who had nowhere else to go." But can he provide?" Vernon shot back. "He can't even pay his loans." That's when Lila smiled. "Actually, Your Honor, he can." She pulled an envelope from her coat. "Community fund. We raised $3,200 in 3 weeks. Combined with Mr. Whitmore's assets, that's enough to pay his equipment loan in full." She handed the envelope to the judge. "Receipts inside. The loan was paid this morning, in cash." Vernon's cigar dropped from his fingers. I stared at Lila. "You what?" "Community takes care of its own," she said quietly. Judge Morrison opened the envelope, examined the receipt, nodded slowly. "Hadley," he said, "it appears your concerns about Mr. Whitmore's finances are no longer relevant." Vernon's face was red now. "Your Honor, this is This is irregular. What's irregular? Judge Morrison interrupted. Is a guardian more interested in mineral rights than a child's welfare? He set the documents aside. But before I rule, I'd like to hear from the child herself. He looked at Nora. Young lady, would you approach? Nora walked forward slowly. She looked so small standing before that table. Nora Ketchum, Judge Morrison said gently. Do you understand what this hearing is about? Yes, sir. Who I live with. And what would you prefer? She glanced back at me, then at Vernon, then at the crowd of faces watching her. I want to stay with Mr. Whitmore, she said, voice clear. He ain't perfect. He's got ghosts and debts, and probably ain't the smartest man in Texas. But he's good. He took me in when I had nothing, fed me, taught me, treated me like I mattered. Her voice grew stronger. Uncle Vernon just wants my land. Mr. Whitmore wants me. The crowd was silent. Judge Morrison nodded. Thank you, child. Then Reverend Pruitt stepped forward one more time. Your Honor, there's one more piece of testimony. From Maeve Ketchum herself. He held up the sealed envelope. Vernon's face went pale. This letter was given to me 2 weeks before Mrs. Ketchum's death, Reverend said, with instructions to read it if her daughter's guardianship was ever in question. He looked at the judge. May I? Judge Morrison nodded. Reverend broke the seal, unfolded the letter, and began to read. To whom it may concern. My name is Maeve Ketchum, and I am writing this in sound mind while dying in body. If you're reading this, I am gone, and my daughter Nora needs a home. The words hung in the spring air. Do not give her to Vernon Hadley. He is my late husband's brother, but he is not family. He came to me when I was sick and offered to take care of things. But what he wanted was my land, not my child. I saw it in his eyes. Vernon stood abruptly. Your Honor. Sit down, Judge Morrison said coldly. Reverend continued. If I had my choice, I would give Nora to Clayton Whitmore. I know him by reputation only. He is a hard man, perhaps too hard, but he is honest. His father and my father rode together in 1901. James Whitmore saved my father's life on the trail. That debt was never repaid. My throat tightened. I ask only that Clay treat my daughter with the dignity she deserves, that he see her not as a burden or charity, but as a person worthy of love. If he can do that, if he can give her the home I cannot, then the debt is paid in full. Reverend looked up. Signed, Maeve Elizabeth Ketchum. Silence fell like snow. Then one by one, people began to stand. Lila first, then Otis, then the farmers, the shopkeepers, the ranchers, the old women, and the young men. 47 people standing in a circle under an oak tree, bearing witness. Judge Morrison looked at them, looked at Vernon, sitting alone with his dead cigar, looked at me and Nora. This court finds, he said slowly, that Vernon Hadley's guardianship is hereby revoked. His claim is motivated by financial gain, not the child's welfare. He turned to me. Clayton Whitmore, pending a formal adoption hearing, you are granted temporary custody of Nora Ketchum. Permanent adoption to be finalized within 60 days. The crowd erupted. People were clapping, crying, embracing. Nora turned and ran to me. I caught her, held her tight while she buried her face in my shoulder. Vernon stood, face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Whitmore. I'll appeal. You'll do nothing, Judge Morrison said, voice hard as iron. And if I see any retaliation, financial, legal, or otherwise, against Mr. Whitmore or any member of this community, I will hold you in contempt and investigate every land transaction you've made in this county. Am I clear? Vernon said nothing, just crushed his cigar underfoot and walked away through the parting crowd. Nobody stopped him. Nobody needed to. He'd lost. 2 weeks later, I stood in my workshop with a paintbrush and a bucket of white paint. The sign was rough-cut pine, sanded smooth, ready for lettering. Otis watched from the doorway. You sure about this? Yeah. I dipped the brush, began painting, slow, careful strokes. Whitmore and daughter, cattle coup. The letters weren't perfect, the spacing was a little off, but it was real. When I finished, Otis helped me carry it to the ranch gate. We hung it on the crossbar, replacing the old sign that just said Whitmore Ranch. Nora came out of the house, stopped when she saw it, stared for a long moment. It's official in 3 weeks, I said. Judge Morrison's signing the papers May 1st. But far as I'm concerned, you've been my daughter since that night in the snow. She touched the sign gently. Whitmore. If you want it, name's yours. She looked at me, eyes bright. I want it. That afternoon, we drove out to the old Ketchum property. The cabin was still half buried from the dust storm, but the land itself was greening up. Wildflowers pushed through the soil, blue bonnets and Indian paintbrush, bright against the brown earth. There was a family there already, young couple with 2 small children. The man was turning soil with a plow, the one I'd reforged with Nora in the forge shed. I'd bought the land from Vernon's foreclosure auction for $1,200. Turned around and sold it to this family for $1 and a promise to work it honest. The man saw us, waved, walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. Mr. Whitmore, Miss Nora. How's she handling? I asked, nodding at the plow. Like a dream. That weld's holding strong. He smiled at Nora. Your handiwork's better than most I've seen. Nora's face flushed with pride. You got any trouble, you come find me, I said. Ranch is 3 miles west. We will. And sir? He extended his hand. Thank you for the land, for the chance. I shook his hand. You'll earn it. Just work it right. We watched them for a while. The man plowing, his wife planting seeds, the children playing in the turned earth. The smell of fresh soil hung rich and clean. Mama would have liked this, Nora said quietly. Seeing the land worked again, seeing it go to family instead of speculators. Yeah, I think she would. We drove to the cemetery on the way home. Maeve's grave sat on the rise, the wooden marker already weathering. Nora pulled wildflowers from her coat pocket, the same kind growing on the old homestead, and knelt to plant them. I stood back, giving her space. She worked quietly, digging small holes with her hands, tucking the flowers in, patting the soil firm. When she finished, she sat back on her heels. Mama, she said softly, I got a new father now, and a new name. I hope that's okay. She touched the marker. He's teaching me things. Forge work and cattle, and how to stand up when folks try to push you down. I think you'd like him. The wind stirred the grass. A meadowlark sang somewhere distant. I miss you, Nora whispered. But I'm all right. We're all right. She stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and walked back to me. Ready? I asked. She nodded. That evening, back at the ranch, Otis came to find me in the barn. He had something wrapped in cloth. What's that? I asked. He unwrapped it. A small iron brand. A W inside a circle, same as mine, but sized for a child's hand. Made it in the forge yesterday, he said. Figured she ought to have her own, for when she's ready to mark her first calf. I took it, felt the weight. The craftsmanship was perfect. When'd you have time for this? Made time. Otis shrugged. Girl's gonna be a rancher. Rancher needs a brand. I found Nora in the bunkhouse, reading by lamplight. When I showed her the brand, her eyes went wide. It's mine? Yours, for when you're ready to use it. She held it like it was made of gold. When will that be? Well, I said, there's a calf being born right about now in the south pen. Thought maybe you'd want to name it. Mark it. She was on her feet instantly. We walked to the pen together under a sky full of stars. The cow was lowing soft, and sure enough, there was a calf on the ground, wet and wobbling, trying its legs. It's a heifer, I said. Yours if you want her. Nora knelt beside the calf, touched its nose gently. The little thing blinked at her, then nuzzled against her hand. What'll you name her? I asked. Nora thought for a moment. Maeve, after Mama. Good name. I heated the brand in a small brazier Otis had set up. When it was ready, I guided Nora's hand. Steady, I said. Quick and sure, like everything else worth doing. She pressed the brand to the calf's flank. The W sizzled, left its mark. Her mark now, her claim. The calf stood, shaky but determined, and went to its mother to nurse. Nora watched them, her hand still holding the brand. Cooling iron in the spring night. You did good, I said. She looked up at me. We did good. And standing there in the smell of cattle and hay and warm earth, with the stars wheeling overhead and a branded calf finding its feet, I thought maybe, for the first time in 5 years, I'd finally done something right. Not perfect. Not without scars, but right. This story happened 18 years ago. I'm telling it now because Nora asked me to. And when your adopted daughter asks you to write down the truth, you do it. I'm old now. Otis Garver, ranch foreman turned storyteller, sitting on a porch that's seen better decades but still holds strong. The ranch passed to Nora. When Clay died in 1949, Hart gave out while mending fence, which is how he would have wanted it. Died doing. She runs it now, her and her husband. Got 3 kids of their own, all learning to work cattle and pump forge bellows and stand up when it'd be easier to sit down. The sign still hangs at the gate, Whitmore and Daughter Cattle Co. She won't change it. Says it reminds her where she came from and who gave her a name worth carrying. Vernon Hadley left Texas in 1935. Heard he went to Oklahoma, tried the oil game there, failed. Last I knew he was selling insurance in Tulsa, never married, never came back. The land, the old Ketchum place, is still worked by that family Clay sold it to. They've done well. Added another 40 acres, built a proper house. Their oldest daughter just graduated teacher's college. That's 3 generations now, growing on soil that could have been lost to speculation and greed. Clay never heard from his daughter Sarah, not once in all the years after the hearing. He kept hoping. I saw it in his face some mornings, the way he'd pause when the mail came. But the letters never arrived. Some wounds don't heal, I reckon. Some distances don't close. But he had Nora, and she had him, and that was enough. I think about him sometimes, about what he taught me without meaning to. That family ain't who raises you, it's who'd walk through dust for you when you got nothing left. That a man's worth isn't measured by what he builds, but by what he's willing to lose for something that can't pay him back. That broken things can be made whole again, not by hiding the scars, but by forging them into something stronger. The depression ended. The dust storm stopped. Spring came, like it always does, even when winter feels permanent. Nora's standing at the fence line right now. I can see her from here, watching her oldest boy work a young horse. She's wearing Clay's old hat, the one with the sweat-stained band and the eagle feather tucked in the brim. She's 28 years old, strong as any man I know, and kind in ways her father taught her. She caught me watching. Waved. I waved back. That millionaire rancher, because that's what the title called him, though he never acted like it, gave a starving girl bread on a winter night when he could have called the law. But what he really gave her was something bigger. A last name, a home, a second chance at being somebody's daughter. And she carried it well, still does. The creek's running strong this year. The wheat's coming in green. The cattle are fat, and the calves are marking clean. Clay would have been proud. Hell, I think Maeve would have been too. Family is who you'd walk through a blizzard for. That's what Clay used to say. Turns out, he was right.